you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm Leyla DeAmicis, and I'm a lecturer in education, in the School of Education, even if most of my teaching is actually in MS programs of psychology. So today I'm going to talk to you about teaching and learning about psychology for and of environmental sustainability, because there is also a little bit of debate about if you say like psychology for or environmental sustainability. So I'm going to talk to you about how I try to include environmental sustainability in a few of the courses that I'm leading. So we know that our universities are quite committed to focus on sustainability, and here is just the definition that the UN has provided for our Sustainable Developmental Goals. So we intend sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And we know that climate change is a threat, and we have to work towards against it, actually, to try to decrease the effects of this challenge. And as universities, we are also committed to this. And here there are some simple suggestions that even in the UN Sustainable Developmental Goals are given to people about what they can do actually to try to reduce their negative effects and their contribution to climate change. But they're very simple things, but also it shows how actually people are responsible about climate change. That is something that sometimes we are trying to not think about. And this is how psychology could come to be helpful on this. Indeed, we are talking about the Anthropocene era, in which we are emphasizing the human responsibility that we have on climate change. So because we are consuming resources too quickly, too much, and regardless the ratio that we have between demand and supplies. So even if we know it and we are worried about it, we don't actually take much action. And this is why, you know, like from the psychological point of view, we can think about how to help people actually to take action. There is a sort of thinking, there is a thinking that this engagement in acting towards against climate change is caused by an evolutionary problem. So our behavior is evolutionarily based, and because of this, for example, we try to solve problems late at a later time and just when they are catastrophic. We are very focused on pleasure and accumulating behavior, and we also act because of social pressure and comparison. Because of this, we are so attracted and behaving in a very consumeristic way. But also we think we are very optimistic about our abilities as humans to be very savvy with our technologies. But at the moment, we are also realizing that whatever, doesn't matter how much smart we are, our technologies might not be able actually to save us against climate change. And we are causing a lot of problems, not only to our species, but also to other species, reducing biodiversity. And all of this goes in a circle, because causing problems to biodiversity cause problems also to the human beings. And also, we are more and more aware that climate change and our behavior not so responsible on our planet is also causing global pandemics. So, how is psychology important in all of this? So, just to have a very quick idea about how psychologists define by the British Psychological Society, we think that psychologists think about what's going on in our hand. So, it's basically trying to think about just try to study how humans think, feel, and behave in the way that they do, but obviously considering a scientific methodology, also looking at the underlying mechanisms that make us think, feel, and behave in a specific way. And it's very important to address real-world issues. So how can psychology also help in environmental sustainability or sustainability in general, but let's focus on environmental sustainability. So if we focus on social and psychological causes of human activities, this can help us to behave in a more sustainable way, or at least also identify our limitations of adaptability. Also, with psychology, we can try to understand how human activities are the initial source of all sustainability problems. And there are a lot of scientific gaps that we need to try to fill in to understand the causes of human activities that contribute to common sustainability concerns. It's quite urgent to act, so we need really a scientific approach to be able to try to understand our human strengths, but also weaknesses. And this urgency is also important to be understood, because sometimes because of the urgency, we can act in unethical ways. And so psychology can be important also for this, to try to understand how actually to work towards sustainability in an ethical way. So we are talking more and more about psychology of environmental sustainability, but it seems something new, but actually it has like some roots that comes from a little bit few years ago. So in the 70s, we started to talk about environmental psychology, but it was like a very broad, say, like how psychologists can actually how people can interact with their environments. In the 90s, though, there was more an awareness about how important it is for people to live in contact with nature. And because of nature degradation of the environment was affecting people from the mental and physical point of view. So psychologists try to study this. And nowadays we are actually trying to think about how psychology can help to protect our planet more in general. So at the roots of everything is like the environmental problems are also are actually behavioral problems. So we need to understand how the human's behavior is affecting and causing environmental problems. What is bad or good for the planet is also bad or good for the human health and well-being. And we know that we have this urgency to act, and it's also a moral imperative, as we said at the start, for ourselves, but also for our future generation. So we talk about psychology in general, but psychology has different areas, and all these areas are actually important to try to understand how we can help people to live more sustainable lives. So from the cognitive point of view, we know that, for example, we can help people to change their beliefs, understanding their bias. From the developmental point of view, we can actually think how we can help people at a different stage of their lives to try to understand sustainability. Also, we have psychology of individual differences that can help us to understand how different people with different characteristics can act in a sustainable way. Media psychology makes us aware about how media actually are affecting our behavior. from the social and organizational point of view. We can try to understand how we can influence each other in a positive way to be more, having more sustainable lives. And from the counseling, clinical, and health point of view, we can also try to understand how, for example, this is just an example, how our emotions are affected by climate change, for example. And also quite important to understand, because when people hear about climate change, most of the times can actually end up in a very depressive mood, and we need to try to understand how we can also make people feel empowered actually and be able to still do something against the climate change. And so it's also quite important to understand and make people understand that as they can act as individuals, but at the same time, they are part of a lot of different systems. So when they can change their life, they can start to change different systems in which they are actually embedded. So what I've done so far, so I have tried to include environmental sustainability in a compulsory course within the MSc Psychological study courses. So especially I'm a course leader of a course called Individual Differences. So for example, this is like the classic curriculum that we have in Individual Differences, but I have tried to include the topic of environmental sustainability, for example, when I was talking about moral disengagement, about climate change, or how transcendence values are important to trying to change people's behavior in a more sustainable way. And I also focus the assessment, or give the possibility to students to focus on environmental sustainability. So the assessment that I have for this course is that students have to suggest an intervention, prevention plan, or a campaign in which they have to manipulate the individual differences, and their intervention, prevention plan, or campaign should either increase bystander intervention or decrease social isolation or improve pro-environmental behavior. So this is how I try to subtly include more and more environmental sustainability in this compulsory course. But what are the difficulties that I encounter is, for example, like if you work on textbooks, so you use textbooks, maybe you don't have much material on this to give you like some ideas. Obviously, you have to do some work to search on this. It's also like quite interesting to see that a lot of resources are not coming from a decolonialized perspective. So a lot of studies are from the UK or the US. So it's quite interesting, though, actually to try to integrate the two aspects, the colonialization and also this awareness of sustainability towards the environment. Interesting enough, also the students' reactions. Sometimes the students found that there was too much, for example, environmental stuff. They wanted to focus more on typical psychology. Although there were, like, especially in some assessment, a lot of very good personal reflections coming up, especially on motivation, for example, on eating or not eating meat. So obviously there are a lot of differences across the student cohort populations. And I found quite interesting to notice that sometimes there are differences between the students that I have online and the students that I have in person. And this probably depends also a little bit more about how the cohort is shaped in terms of characterized by the students that attend these different courses. So although this assessment, the choice of pro-environmental behavior is not super popular at the moment, and I'm reflecting on it one of the reasons could be that I'm actually teaching on a master course program of psychology that is a conversion course. So students are quite motivated and thinking possibly of psychology more in terms of counseling psychology, educational psychology. So environmental seems like something that doesn't lead them to the typical track of psychology. But when I have students that, for example, select this assessment with pro-environmental behavior, they also like high grades. So they are highly motivated in this on this topic. And the other way that I have tried to introduce environmental sustainability in our courses is actually to developing a specific course on psychology of environmental sustainability. And here is the program. So I have tried to include like different areas of psychology, how they can contribute all to help us to encourage and support people to develop a sustainable, environmental sustainable behavior. And the assessment, it's kind of quite applied. They have to reflect on a group work, on an organization working on environmental sustainability, and individually they have also to suggest a startup that is also focused on environmental sustainability, obviously providing a psychological perspective. So what have been the challenges in this? Is the challenge that I had there at the moment, a few textbooks, and again, like the problem of finding some decolonializing material. In terms of choice, this has been the first year that I ran this course, and has not been super popular, but because it has been like the first year, so I'm very hopeful, and I will try to advertise it more. Hopefully, it can be chosen more in the next year. So in terms of students' reactions, some students believe that environmental sustainability is quite important, but others don't think that environmental sustainability is so important as an elective course compared with, clinical health or educational psychology. So far the assessment has been quite ambitious, but is very authentic and meaningful. And I think students actually were very happy about it. At the start, they were a bit like unsure, but of course, like with support, actually we had very nice results. So the problem is, and the question is, how can we maximize the interest of students about environmental sustainability? Is it better to include environmental sustainability as much as possible across all different courses of psychology? Is good to have like an elective course to focus the attention as much as possible on this. Possibly we can actually try to maintain both and support both these choices, it would be important, and this is what I will try to do as soon as possible, trying to understand what are the opinions of students in this program towards environmental sustainability within this, especially MSc Psychology programs, in conversion programs. So the fear is that maybe they feel already knowing a lot about it, or this is still not a priority for psychology. And so even if it might be that the elective could feel like something repetitive compared with sustainability in the other courses in the program, but I think if we focus the attention on more applied purposes in the elective course, this could be still important. So for me, it's more about trying to have environmental sustainability as much as possible in psychology courses to really show how psychology is important for this area that is affecting our lives. Okay, that's me. Thank you.